What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing bizarre encounters with possible interdimensionals, aka High Strangeness 4. With all of the strange, bizarre, and downright weird entities and creatures I discuss with you all here on this channel, there's bound to be some encounters and information that I come across that I can't quite classify. And that's why I was going to title this one Possible Interdimensionals. We pretty much know where angels, demons, and even aliens come from. At least for the most part, we feel confident we do, right? Sometimes though, I come across some entity or creature that I simply cannot place, and that isn't something commonly encountered in the community, and it definitely isn't talked about a lot. You guys gave me such amazing and great feedback with one of the most recent videos that I did, High Strangeness 3, and that's where I discussed entities just like these ones, only of the presumably spirit in nature, possibly even a shadow being, the walking Sam entity. So I thought I'd put out High Strangeness 4 right away, because when you guys speak and give me such great responses, I like to give you as much of that content as I possibly can for you to watch and listen to. Even the aforementioned entities, who some of us think we know so much about, and most of us here in this community are pretty confident that we know where they come from at least, are really almost just as elusive. As with each encounter, we are almost always left with more questions than answers. And that's a fact. These entities that we're discussing today, though, guys, in my opinion, are well beyond what we would consider bizarre, to be honest, and are possibly setting the bar for a whole new meaning of the word fringe. They're crazy. So these entities all seem to have one thing in common, and that's that they don't even seem to live up to the word paranormal and could very well be from another universe, another galaxy, another dimension or realm, or somewhere else that we haven't even considered altogether. So put on your tinfoil hats and get yourselves comfy as we investigate some encounters with truly out of this world and possibly off of this plane entities. Let's jump right in. In 1973, on the Isle of Wight in the small town of Sandown in the more eastern region of England, a 7-year-old little girl and a friend were out exploring some woods near their home. It was May and the weather was nice, and it seemed the perfect day to be out in the fresh air and playing. The area was known as the Shanklin and Sandown Golf Club, and the little girls were startled when all of a sudden they started hearing a weird, shrill cry echoing through the woods. It was described as a piercing sound and was likened to an ambulance siren. It was reverberating out of the woodlands and into the surrounding areas. It wasn't like a normal ambulance siren though, which normally would be mainly described as annoying and loud, as the girls later described this one as creepy and off somehow. It was immediately clear that it wasn't a sound that belonged there in the forest or anywhere else in the general vicinity. Despite being creeped out and even a little frightened, they did what most kids their age would do and continued to investigate the noise. They were curious more than scared and tried to track down where it was coming from. They followed the sound and it led them to a property adjoining the nearby Sandown Airport. Once they reached this general area though, the sound stopped all at once and just as suddenly as it had started, and the silence that lingered was even more eerie than the noise itself, at least in that moment. The two girls continued in their search and didn't have to go very far before finding the source of the strange and shrill noise. They crossed a nearby footbridge that went over a creek, and what they saw was literally beyond explanation. They didn't see it immediately, but it slowly rose up from underneath the bridge they stood on, seemingly coming from the depths of the creek below. Not that creeks are very deep, and in all actuality, it could have just been hiding underneath the bridge in general because it wasn't wet. That's something we might never know, but you all have such attention for detail, I figured I should clarify that one thing here. So anyways, a creature that looked to be some sort of abomination, even as far as creatures and even monsters go, crawled out on all fours at first and then stood upright facing them. And they said it was unlike not only anything they had ever seen, but also very much unlike anything that they had ever been able to even imagine or come up with on their own in their minds. In an article on the encounter published in a 1978 edition of the British UFO Research Association's journal, author Norman Oliver described the encounter like this, quote, "He was nearly 7 feet tall and had no neck, for his head appeared to be wedged straight onto his shoulders. He wore a yellow pointed hat, which interlocked with the red collar of a tattered green tunic. A round black knob was affixed to the top of his head, and wooden antennae were attached to each side. The face had triangular markings for eyes, a brown square of a nose, and motionless yellow lips. Other round markings were on his paper white face, and a fringe of red hair fell down onto his forehead. Wooden slats protruded from his sleeves and from below his white trousers," end quote. My first thought when reading this quote was that the children were referring to this thing as a he. This struck me because I've explained to you guys and others so many times that as human beings, when encountering the supernatural, otherworldly, paranormal, extraterrestrial, etc., we are sometimes able to instinctively, whether we realize it at the time or not, know what the gender of an unknown and seemingly non-binary entity or creature is. But later I come to realize why they spoke of him as a he. Either that or they simply said he for a number of other reasons, one of which is the lack of any description of breasts. The other thing that almost immediately caught my attention is research that I've been compiling on people who believe they have encountered literal stick figures. So stay tuned for that one, guys. Otherwise, the description makes me think of one of those old creepy scarecrow Halloween masks, but I don't know. It's definitely up to your own personal interpretation because, again, it's unlike anything we've ever come across before, at least as far as what I've reported on this channel. So the encounter doesn't end there though, because the girls then described the creature as having what looked to be a regular old human-made book, like one you'd find in any library anywhere. He seemed very clumsy and unpracticed though as he fumbled through the pages and stared at the girls. After a moment or two, the book fell from his hands. Accidentally, he lost his grip on it and it fell into the creek below. The entity or whatever it was leapt over the bridge and into the creek, grabbed its book, and then crawled back out of the water once again to face them. It was soaking wet, as was the book, and the little girls were stunned and frozen in place with a mixture of awe and fear. Obviously. The being then turned after a second and started jumping through the woods away from them, but the series of leaps and bounds he performed seemed to be more suited for someone perhaps not subject to our human rules of gravity. They seemed to be impossible feats of movement through the air, and within seconds, it was no longer in sight of the witnesses as it had seemingly gone inside of what looked to be some sort of metallic hut type thing that was not off too far in the near distance, and then re-emerged with something else in its hands. This time though, instead of a sopping wet library book, it had what resembled a microphone attached to a thin wire to a black box with a knob or two on it. It was either a knob or a button, the girls couldn't be sure. Once the being either pressed the button or turned the knob, that strange and creepy piercing wailed through the air again, and the girls flinched in reaction to the suddenly hearing the assault on their ears again, as up until then, and since the last time it stopped, the woods had been abnormally and eerily quiet. This time they were so close to the sound that they turned and ran from it, terrified to their very core, and their ears feeling like they would bleed because the sound was so abrasive to them. As they ran off in horror, though, the wailing all at once stopped again and was replaced by a voice that sounded as though it were coming through the woods from a loudspeaker asking, quote, "Are you still there?" End quote. Now, these little girls were admittedly terrified and very confused at this point, but they were also only 7 years old, and their curiosity once again got the best of them as they turned back towards where they had just moments ago fled from in order to further investigate what in the world was happening with this creature and the microphone it was now addressing them through. When it saw them approaching again, they said it almost immediately looked like it was happy to see them again as it started sort of dancing around in a jig and then produced the wet book from behind itself, so probably pulled it out of a pocket or something. It then proceeded to write a message to them in the ruined book, and it held the book with the message up for them to read. The handwriting was scrawled and childlike. Even to 7-year-old children, it seemed like it was written by a much younger child. However, it was legible and they could read it, and they claimed it said, quote, "Hello, and I am all colors Sam," end quote. The girls conversed with Sam for a little while, and throughout the course of this conversation, the entity did tell them that it wasn't human, and so the girls asked him if he was a ghost, to which he replied, quote, "Not really, but I am in an odd sort of way," end quote. The girls continued to ask the entity what he was, and finally he looked at them and in a sort of cryptic way replied, quote, "You know," end quote. This Sam entity would further explain that he wasn't the only one of his kind here on this planet or in this dimension or whatever, but that the others were almost always afraid of humans, and even when they weren't, they're really shy about interacting with them. Eventually, he invited the girls into his metallic windowless hut, the one that he had gone into just moments earlier to retrieve that microphone. It had a flap as a door and was odd-shaped and very much out of place in the middle of the woods between an airport and a golf course. The girls, for whatever reason, accepted his invitation and went inside this entity's little hut, this all-color Sam's house. They saw it had 2 stories and metal flooring and ceilings. There were all kinds of strange-looking knobs, buttons, and dials all over the walls. The place seemed exclusively furnished in wooden furniture that was falling apart or rotting or otherwise damaged. So the fact that it's metallic, that it's weird shaped, and then it had these knobs and buttons all over the walls, did immediately make me think of spaceship. But All Colors Sam said that he was kind of a ghost. So I don't know. I'm thinking extraterrestrial now. You guys have got to let me know what you think about this one. The place was a total dump, and it must have shown on the girls' faces as Sam seemed to see their disdain for his dwelling and quickly assured them that it was only his temporary residence and that he actually lived in a very large and modernized, luxurious building on the mainland in England. As if things couldn't get much stranger, this is when he removed his little hat and pulled a berry out of it. He shoved the berry into his ear, it came out his right eye socket, and then, with a simple quick nod of his head, it shot out of his mouth. It seems as though he was trying really hard to entertain the girls and keep them there with him. It worked too, because this little magic trick made the girls giggle and clap in delight, and they weren't at all scared of All Colors Sam anymore. They hung out with this strange entity, which honestly keeps making me think, for reasons I can't quite point out, of the Scarecrow from the original Wizard of Oz movie, for about an hour until finally they said goodbye and left the hut in order to traverse the woods back home. One of the little girls immediately told her father what she and her friend had witnessed, and instead of just dismissing it as a child's strange imagination like most adults still do, and also probably out of some sort of fear that there was this creep guy luring kids into a hut in the woods, he immediately took his daughter and went to where she said she had first met the interdimensional interloper. So he didn't waste any time because he thought this guy was some sort of prevert. You guys know what I mean. Once the dad and the daughter got to the spot, though, there was nothing there to ever indicate that there had been a hut or anything else out of the ordinary. No one else in the area ever reported seeing anything like what was described, either at the time, before, or after, and in fact, no one else ever reported hearing the strange wailing noise which had originally lured the little girls in the first place. So, what was this thing? Was it a sicko human being who, for whatever reason, dressed up in this strange and extremely convincing costume simply to lure little kids and perform oddball magic tricks, then allow them to leave his little hut without any kind of incident? Was it an alien, an extraterrestrial, a ghost, or something else altogether? Something from either another dimension or another universe entirely? Much of what I came across in my source material as far as speculation was people saying that Sam had to have been from another universe, but to me that would make him/it a sort of extraterrestrial, right? Because ETs come from outer space, no matter which galaxy, planet, or universe they come from. But I don't know, I could be wrong on that, so as always, respectfully let me know, and I'm dying to hear your thoughts on this one for sure. Despite there being no trace of anything they had described, the girls were adamant that they had been telling the truth about all of it, and that they were also quite sure of where the hut had been and where the entity had emerged from under the bridge there that day. So they knew that right at this little footbridge was where the hut was. So it wasn't like they were confused about where it was located. There wasn't any indentations in the ground. There was nothing under the bridge. The entity quickly became known as the Sandown Clown and hasn't ever been seen or heard from again, at least not reportedly anyways. As there's not a shred more information on this creature, we will most likely never know, and that's extremely frustrating. I know, guys, I feel the same way. Believe me. Believe me. I searched. So one thing that stuck out to me, well, several things stuck out to me here, and they're probably quite obvious, but one specific thing was that the sighting was a complete and total one-off. This isn't the only encounter with a strange and unknown being or entity where it was only witnessed one time and never again, and not by a long shot either. Our next one comes from the site The Crypto Crew and took place the year I was born. It was a good year and a great decade, 1983. Our witness is a woman who is only known by the name Patty. She was innocently driving down a rural part of Highway 94 one day in broad daylight when she had her shockingly bizarre encounter with an incredibly strange entity. She was approximately 11 miles from the town of Murray, Kentucky in the United States. What she saw defies any sort of classification known to me or anyone else, and that's really saying something considering all of the newer, I use that term loosely, entities we've been bombarded with encounters of in the past 2 years or so, or even in the last decade or so, if I'm being completely honest. As Patty drove, there were wide open fields on either side of the highway, and something suddenly jumped right out in front of her car, scaring her half to death and forcing her to slam on her brakes. After jumping out in front of her vehicle, Patty said the entity simply, quote-unquote, walked across the road to the other side. She described the way it walked as, quote, like a gorilla, end quote. However, it was shockingly clear that this was no gorilla, again I say, by a long shot. For some reason though, Patty decided to pull her car over, get out, and yell to the strange creature. The thing stopped at the sound of her voice yelling to it and turned to face her. This is when she got a much better look at what she was dealing with, and fear and dread burned and boiled up immediately inside of her, and she said it penetrated her to her very core and bones. She described it as completely hairless and at least 7 feet tall. It had an abnormally long neck, and its skin was rough and bright pink. It had a tiny head, pointed ears, and a pig's snout furry nose. Patty described her encounter further by saying, quote, "I would describe it as a cross between a primate, a pig, and a human," end quote. She said it was the entity's face that was most noticeable to her, and she froze in her tracks when it turned and locked eyes with her. She claimed its eyes were intelligent and knowing somehow, and she further described it as, quote, "remarkably human," end quote. Patty was so troubled by its gaze on her that she slowly started backing away in order to get back into her vehicle and to get out of there like a bat out of hell as fast as she possibly could. She made it to the car and immediately locked all of the doors. This thing was standing directly in front of her car now, unflinching as she slammed on the horn and unmoving as she stared it down through the windshield in complete and total horror. After it stared at her for what seemed like an eternity, but admittedly was probably only about another minute, it continued on its way across the road, and Patty hightailed it out of there. I don't blame her. She left the entity far behind and well beyond the view of her own rearview mirror. Once she was home, she told her husband what she had seen, but he flat out didn't believe her and basically said she was lying and crazy. Our next encounter comes from a woman we only know as Jenny, who told her story to Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters. At the Hampton Bays in New York in 2006, Jenny brought her fiance to show him one of her favorite sights in the area, which were the incandescent shrimp that glittered in the darkened waters underneath in the nearby beach. It was a remote area, but decidedly romantic, at least up until the encounter happened, and put quite the damper on their otherwise pleasant and intimate rendezvous. Jenny explained, quote, "As soon as we stepped onto the beach, I had a feeling of general unease, that instinctive fear that one would experience in the presence of a predator. I chose to ignore it, occasionally peeking over my shoulder at the long, empty stretch of beach behind me, but mostly focusing on the tiny glowing shrimp beneath our feet. At one point, I felt a presence, and again, chose to ignore it as I've dealt with that quite a bit in my 30 years. I had not voiced my unease to my fiance, so he was completely unaware. About 5 to 10 minutes into our short walk, we were both hunched over, his back facing the jetty, mine facing the stretch of empty beach, when he started peering over my shoulder up into the sky. Perplexed, he'd look for a second, then look away. At this point, I was still trying to retain my composure and not look. Finally, after a few minutes, he looked over my head and yelled, 'Oh my God, what is that?' I turned to look, and flying directly over my head was this huge creature I'd never seen. It appeared translucent/transparent, no color whatsoever, no visible structure outside of the motion, which indicated what it looked like. Now, I myself am a visual artist, so this left a very distinct impression on me. This creature was shaped and moving in the way a manta ray would, yet completely transparent. No color at all. I could see the stars through this thing. The only thing to allow the structure any appearance was the moonlight shining somehow on its exterior. It was larger than a standard sedan. Its wingspan was at least, from what I could estimate, 10 feet in width. While it was flying, its wings moved up and down. The movement seemed familiar, like that of a gull swooping down and hovering over the shoreline. It was approximately 10 to 15 feet over my head. It had no visible head or tail. No discernible limbs or appendages of any kind. It appeared and moved exactly as a manta ray without the cephalic lobes or tail. I was completely awestruck, but then the fear took over, and after about 30 seconds of staring at this thing, we both turned and bolted toward the car. While running, we both simultaneously jerked our heads to the right in response to a glowing green light which seemed to flash twice. It was not the light from the tower on the jetty, nor was it from any boat. That water was clear. I never looked behind me. We started heading back on Dune Road when we saw what I could only describe as 2 smaller rays, which moved like a bat would, flying together from right to left overhead past our car. These 2 were transparent but had a grayish color to them. Strange. They were flying in the direction of the beach where the larger, more transparent creature was. It was so beautiful and so strange. It reminded me more of a sea creature than anything else. Maybe our air is like water to them, end quote. Well, I don't even know what to do with that one, guys. What do you all think? I'm dying to hear your theories and opinions so far. The first thing that came to my mind with that report, the report of it being so very translucent, was the cloaking done by both the Glimmerman entity, but also by extraterrestrials when they use such devices on their crafts and ships so as not to be seen by us when they're in our atmosphere. This seems like something similar, but altogether different at the same time. And it's really intriguing me to the point where I am going to start looking for more instances like this. Our final encounter happened in Caceres, Spain, back in the summer of 1965. It was August to be exact, and our witnesses are a man named Juan Dominguez and his sister Isabel. They were out for a stroll together one day along the countryside, bringing some bundles of peaches home, and were passing right outside of the village of Fragosa at the time of their bizarre and seemingly unclassifiable encounter. They approached a low wall surrounding a garden and noticed an odd figure they couldn't quite make out what it was and were sure they had never seen before. It was described by our witnesses as pacing back and forth along the wall of the garden. As they approached it, the siblings noticed the creature was emitting a sound they likened to a human being humming. Very quickly, though, the humming sound emanating from this thing became irrelevant, as bizarre as it was, and that's because they were able to get closer still and really get a good look at this thing. Once again, so 3 encounters or 4 encounters, and once again, the entity was 7 feet tall. This one with arms that were so thin and long, it wasn't possible in any way that it could have been a human. The entity itself was described as opaque and seemed to be made up of something gelatinous, goo-type substance that not only glistened in the summer sun, but also pulsated nonstop and with every step it took. It had something that looked like it could be called a head, but nothing that could be considered a face, but somehow the pair knew that the thing was watching them, and watching them rather intently too, again. As the siblings stared in horror and confusion, the entity suddenly stopped its incessant pacing and turned to face them. Then it quickly started walking toward them, almost in a run. They had no intention of waiting around to see why it was approaching or what it wanted, and they immediately turned and fled home as fast as they could, and they never came across the entity again and never heard of anyone else having ever encountered it. So once again, it immediately reminded me of the Glimmerman, aside from the pulsating and slightly more goopy appearance. I had someone, Sirach, their name was, S-I-R-A-C-H, and there was like some numbers after it, who had an encounter with a jellyfish, but it was glowing in orange. This thing reminds me of like a giant humanoid walking jellyfish. So I am going to look for more encounters with all 4 of these creatures, okay, and see if I can bring you more. But for now, are they interdimensional interlopers? Are they just regular extraterrestrials that we just, there are so many extraterrestrials, I'm sure, that we have no idea. I mean, think of the universe in its entirety, and every single star, and every single planet, and every single whatever, right? I don't know a lot about astronomy, but you guys know what I mean. So with that, but why are we suddenly seeing them now? Or is the question, is it like people are being able to report it more widely now? So I think that might also be it. That's all I have for you today, guys, but don't worry, there are so many more entities like this and so much more information on entities that defy any sort of classification, like I said, and I plan on continuing to post them as much as I can while still leaving room for the massive variety you have all hopefully come to know and love from my channel. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, and if you just want to see me smile. Spread the love by sharing this video, guys. I really need to get my sub count up, really. I love and appreciate all of you so very much. I'm going to try to start remembering on Mondays and Thursdays and whenever I upload to pop into the premiere. And anyone in there, I'm just going to randomly choose someone to be given a personal intuitive oracle reading if that's what you guys want. I'm also going to be raffling off books. Guys, speaking of books, I have some left over from this signing, so I would really like to get rid of them so I'm not stuck with all of these books. I mean, I love my book, but I use the Kindle version, right? So if you'd like an autographed copy, please hit me up. Any correspondence or anything you need to hit me up for, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. I'm back full force into work, guys, as of the time you're going to be seeing this. So any emails that you're waiting for me to respond to, reply to, don't worry, I'm getting to them today. In the description box, you will find links to make a donation to the channel, PayPal, Patreon, Cash App. If you become a patron for $20 a month or more, I will give you automatically once a month a personal intuitive oracle reading as a thank you. Thank you guys so much for all of the donations. My Amazon wish list gift link is also in the description box if you would like to send me a gift. I could use some new oracle decks. There are crystals on there. I mean, everything. I put all my stuff that I want for myself on that list too. So there's stuff from like $5 to who knows. So I always appreciate the gifts. You guys are so generous with your time, your energy, your finances. I really, really do appreciate it. Let's get the sub count up. So also, if you have any requests or if you would like a personal intuitive oracle reading from me for the rest of the month of November, because I had such a great response in October, if you would like a December reading, I'm doing them half price, the remotes, so $20 to PayPal or Cash App. And I will give you a reading for December 2022. The face-to-face through FaceTime or Google Meet, the video chat ones, those are still the same price, but they are much more in-depth. So again, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. The second issue that I'm in of Paranormal Press Magazine is also available. I'm still waiting to get my mail from the other house so that I can show it to you guys. The first issue as well, if you would like an autographed copy of those, please hit me up and I will get them to you. Those are a big deal for me, guys, and I'm really excited. By the time you see this, it will have already passed, but you can still watch it, obviously, on November 6th, Sunday. Disembodied Voices on the Paraflix network. So the Paranormal Netflix, it's called Paraflix. It's $3.99 a month, but they do give a 3-day free trial. I am going to be on the show, Disembodied Voices, for a 2-part episode. We talk a lot about my childhood and my everything that I've seen and how I grew up and how it affected me and everything that I do now. If you would like to purchase the self-empowerment or just the spiritual helper boxes, the manifestation intention sprays, I'm still able to do those. So please hit me up, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. And for anything else that I may be forgetting, every Wednesday night, it's me and Ghost Dragon CW from 7:15 to 11:15ish p.m. Eastern Time, live intuitive oracle. Come on in, give me a small donation, and I pull one card for you and give you a weekly reading, okay? And if you don't know what live intuitive oracle is or what intuitive oracle is, and you're thinking you might want to get a reading, come on in, because donation is not mandatory. It's just requested, or suggested. So if you want to see what my readings are all about, that would be a great place to start. Guys, be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything. Never accept anything less than others being kind to you, but most of all, be kind to yourself, because if nobody told you today, you're amazing, you're worth it, you're capable, you're beautiful, you are unique, you are perfectly and wonderfully made, and you deserve to have everything great in the world given to you. Just make sure you treat others and yourself with kindness. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time.